From waging all-out wars against rivals.
The FBI arrested members of the Bandidos in San Antonio yesterday. They're now going to be charged with racketeering and waging a deadly war against their rivals, the Cossacks gang.
Watching their own members indicted for murder.
After 7 months, the verdicts have been handed down in the Bandidos trial. All 6 of the accused bikers were found guilty. Wayne Kellerstein, Michael Sandom, and Dwight Mushi were found guilty of 8 counts each of first-degree murder.
These are the most feared bandidos now sitting behind bars.
New today, more than a dozen members of Texas-based outlaw motorcycle gang, the Bandidos, have been charged in a sweeping federal indictment. At least 10 of those charged arrested this morning.
Most people think outlaw bikers fear the police. They don't. And the Bandidos Motorcycle Club proves it. The club was built on loyalty and brotherhood. But some members pushed that loyalty into violence, retaliation, and crimes that went far beyond club politics. Across the United States, Canada, and Australia, a long list of Bandidos members now sits in prison cells, serving sentences that range from decades to life. Murder, racketeering, drug trafficking, arson, even crimes that shocked the outlaw world itself. And these weren't just foot soldiers. They include national presidents, chapter leaders, sergeants at arms, the men who gave the orders, and the ones who carried them out. This is the ranking of the most feared bandidos now sitting behind bars. Let's meet the ones whose names still carry weight even in prison. 1. Jeffrey Fay Pike, March 18, 2006, North Austin, Texas. Anthony Benish walks out of Anthony's Pizza and Pasta with his girlfriend and her 2 kids. It's an ordinary family evening until a single rifle shot drops him face down in the parking lot. Benish wasn't a random target. He had been trying to start a Hells Angels chapter in Austin. The Bandidos had warned him repeatedly to stop. The Texas rocker on their backs made that clear. But Benish believed he had the Angels behind him. And when you feel that patch at your back, you don't bow to anyone. He ignored every warning. That decision got him killed. Investigators later learned the hit wasn't spontaneous. It was ordered. And at the top of the chain was Jeffrey Fay Pike, national president of the Bandidos, a member since 197.9, and the man who controlled the club's power structure across the state. 4 Bandidos carried out his directive: Johnny Romo, Robert Romo, Jesse Chronic Benavidez, and Norberto Hammer Serna Jr. They acted on Pike's orders to eliminate what the club saw as a direct threat to their territory. The Benish murder was just one part of Pike's larger operation. Under his leadership, the Bandidos pushed violence against rival clubs, ran meth and cocaine through Texas, and worked directly with the Mexican mafia, all. At the same time, Pike presented himself publicly as a businessman restoring classic cars. That image collapsed in January 2016 when federal agents raided his home during Operation Texas Rocker. Pike was arrested and charged under RICO for murder conspiracy, drug trafficking, and assaults carried out in the club's name. In 2018, a federal jury found him guilty on all counts. Pike received a life sentence plus 10 years. His vice president received 2 life terms. The shooters were eventually arrested as well. Jeffrey Fay Pike will die in federal prison. The man who once tried to keep Texas under one patch lost everything in enforcing that claim. 2. John Xavier Portillo. Just after midnight on January 31, 2002, a quiet rest stop along Interstate 37, just south of San Antonio, became the setting for an ambush. Robert Lara, 24, wasn't a bandido, but he wasn't a random civilian either. He had ties to local street crime, and the Bandidos believed he was the one who shot their chapter secretary, Javier Negrete, 3 weeks earlier. That belief made him a target. 3 cars were waiting in the dark. When Lara stepped out, Winans made the confirmation call. 6 Bandidos closed in. Richard Scarface Merla, one of the San Antonio chapter's enforcers, dragged Lara from the vehicle. Merla and Frederick. 11 rounds hit Lara. He died on the pavement where he fell. This wasn't random. 3 months earlier, Bandido member Javier Negrete had been shot and killed outside Tiffany's Billiards. Inside the Southwest San Antonio chapter, its president, John Xavier Portillo, decided that Lara was responsible. Whether the intel was right or wrong didn't matter. Portillo wanted payback, and he ordered the hit. He orchestrated everything. He supplied Merla with the murder weapon. After the killing, the crew regrouped at Portillo's brother's house, where Portillo told everyone to stay quiet. Then he used a torch to destroy the gun. Merla and Cortez were later awarded Expect No Mercy patches, recognition inside the club for carrying out violent business. Portillo had been moving up the ranks of the Bandidos since the 1990s. His San Antonio chapter was known inside the organization as its enforcement arm. After years of violence, Portillo rose even higher, first becoming National Sergeant at Arms and eventually National Vice President under Fay Pike. For years, the Lara murder stayed unsolved. That changed in 2004 when Merla stabbed former boxer Robert Pekin Quiroga to death. With pressure closing in, Merla flipped, confessing to Lara's murder and naming Portillo as the man who ordered it. On January 6, 2016, federal agents arrested Portillo as part of Operation Texas Rocker. He was denied bond and stayed in custody until trial. In 2018, both Winans and Merla testified against him. The jury found Portillo guilty of RICO conspiracy, murder in aid of racketeering, conspiracy to commit murder, drug trafficking, and firearms offenses. On September 24, 2018, Portillo, age 59, was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences, plus 20 years in federal prison. No parole, no release date. He didn't say goodbye to his family before the marshals took him away. Portillo, once the enforcer president of San Antonio, and later the national vice president, will die in federal prison. 3. George Waggers. From 1998 to 2005, George Waggers served as international president of the Bandidos Motorcycle Club. Under his leadership, the club expanded to 170 chapters across 14 countries with roughly 2,400 members. His vice president during that period was Fay Pike, but behind the growth was a serious problem. In 2003, members of the Missoula, Montana chapter kidnapped a man identified only as SS. The exact details remain sealed, but federal agents knew the kidnapping happened, and they knew Waggers issued one critical order afterward. He told members not to talk to investigators. That instruction became witness tampering, a federal crime. By 2005, the FBI, ATF, and DEA had built a major RICO case against the club's leadership. The investigation exposed drug trafficking, stolen motorcycle operations, and violent enforcement tactics across multiple states. Waggers wasn't charged for committing those acts himself, but for directing the people who did, and for trying to shield them from federal investigators. On June 9, 2005, federal agents raided locations across Washington, Montana, and South Dakota. Waggers was arrested along with more than 24 Bandidos members. Investigators seized firearms, stolen Harley parts, and documents tying the club to interstate criminal activity. Waggers faced decades if convicted, but prosecutors offered a deal. In May 2006, he pleaded guilty to 1 count of racketeering conspiracy. In that plea, he admitted to encouraging witness tampering and helping facilitate the trafficking of stolen motorcycles. 14 other charges were dropped. On October 6, 2006, Waggers was sentenced to 20 months in federal prison and fined $10,000. He served most of that time before release, but his presidency was finished. Fay Pike took control during Waggers' arrest, and he never gave the patch back. George Waggers, the man who once ran the Bandidos worldwide, ultimately went down not for violence, but for trying to hide it. 4. John Feffer. What began as a normal Saturday night at the Hog Stop bar turned violent in seconds. Adam Burns, a Brothers East member, never saw John Feffer until the punch landed, sending him stumbling backward as the parking lot erupted. 5 more Bandidos rushed in. Burns hit the dirt. They kicked him, stomped him, and beat him for nearly 30 seconds before the gunfire started. He was shot 6 times, 5 bullets tearing through his back. Burns died on the gravel lot. where he fell. Feffer staggered away with a gunshot wound to the arm, and when police searched him at the hospital, they found a pistol magazine. A photographer documenting the event recorded the entire attack, including the beating, the circle of men around Burns, and the moment shots were fired. But the violence was not random. Brothers East had split from the Bandidos in 2019, and national leadership responded with a smash-on-sight order. Any Brothers East member seen in public was to be attacked immediately. Feffer followed that order. At just 32, he was president of the Bandidos Welcome to Hell chapter, a crew created specifically to target Brothers East. 2.5 years later, Feffer surfaced in another outbreak of violence. February 23, 2023. Bimbaz Bar near Tomball. Nearly 70 Bandidos gathered for a regional meeting. They summoned 14 members of the Graybeards, a non-outlaw club that had unknowingly crossed a line by making peace with Brothers East. Feffer questioned one of the Graybeards, then attacked. 70 against 14. The beating was deliberate and overwhelming. Bones were broken, members were concussed, and when it was over, the Bandidos stripped the Graybeards of their cuts, photographing the stolen vests and circulating them like trophies. Federal investigators later connected Feffer to a larger pattern of violence, including assaults, shootings, and arsons across Houston from 2020 to 2024. Prosecutors described Welcome to Hell as a highly violent chapter, created specifically to eliminate rivals. In February 2025, federal prosecutors indicted Feffer and 13 others on racketeering, violent crime, firearm offenses, and witness tampering. He initially faced the death penalty for Burns's murder, but in October 2025, the Department of Justice declined capital punishment. Even without it, Feffer still faces the possibility of life in prison. A federal judge denied him bond. He remains in custody awaiting trial in May 2026. His case file includes more than 162,000 pages of records, hours of video, audio recordings, and extensive digital forensics. The Navy veteran who built the Welcome to Hell chapter has not been sentenced yet, but based on the evidence, he may spend the rest of his life in a federal prison cell. 5. Bradley Rickenbacher, Dollar Bill. The night Adam Burns was killed didn't involve just one Bandido. While Feffer threw the punch that started the chaos, another man shaped what happened next. Bradley Rickenbacher. Burns' brothers, East brothers, tried to reach him. Bradley Rickenbacher stepped into their path. The 37-year-old blocked their advance, standing as a human barrier between Burns and anyone who might help. 30 seconds into the beating, gunshots ripped through the parking lot. Roy Gomez fired 6 rounds. 5 went through Burns's back. Rickenbacher didn't throw punches or fire a weapon, but he made sure no one reached Burns before he died. He was secretary-treasurer of the Welcome to Hell chapter, a Katy-based Bandidos chapter created in 2021 specifically to target Brothers East. Before that, he'd been part of the Mascareros Support Club. He served in the Navy from 2006 to 2012 and later worked as an elevator repairman. But on that September night, he was still with the Mascareros. Support clubs follow orders from full-patch members. Several Bandidos were already at the bar when they spotted 3 Brothers East members. They called for reinforcements. Rickenbacher answered. Feffer initiated. Rickenbacher blocked. Federal prosecutors later described his role clearly. Assault in aid of racketeering and using a firearm during a crime of violence. Under RICO law, helping commit a murder carries the same weight as doing it. Rickenbacher helped make the killing possible. 2.5 years later, he took part in another attack. February 2025. Federal agents arrested Rickenbacher during the Welcome to Hell takedown. He was charged with racketeering conspiracy, assault in aid of racketeering, and using a firearm during a violent crime. He faces life in prison if convicted. Judge Yvonne Ho denied bail. Rickenbacher remains in federal custody. His trial is scheduled for May 2026. The former Navy sailor who stood guard while Adam Burns died now sits in a federal cell awaiting trial, facing the possibility of spending the rest of his life behind bars. 7. Brandon Hance, County Line Ice House is located along Old Highway 105 in Montgomery County, Texas. When Brandon Hance and two other bandidos walked toward it, the bar was dark, closed for the night, and completely empty, but they weren't there for a drink. Instead, they were there to send a message. And immediately, they set the bar on fire. Flames tore through the building until nothing was left standing. It was ruled as arson by the investigators. The motive was simple: retaliation. County Line Ice House had hosted Brothers East Fight Night events, and the bandidos viewed that as aiding their enemy. Burning the place down was payback. Hance was 33 and had only been in the club for about a year. Before the Bandidos, he was known for something very different: reality TV. He appeared twice on Survivor, first in 2011 and again in 2013. His first season showed him as a conflicted, emotional young man. His second ended in chaos when he dumped food, threatened contestants, and was removed from the game. After TV fame faded, Hance settled into family life. Married, 4 kids, no criminal history. Then he joined the Bandidos, and everything changed. By July 2024, Hance was done with the Bandidos, but leaving didn't make him safe. The club put a green light on him, a death order aimed at him and his family. Terrified, he turned to social media, posting TikToks about regret and giving interviews about why he left. The threats didn't stop the federal case. In February 2025, Hance was indicted on racketeering, conspiracy, and arson charges. Each count carries up to 20 years, meaning he could face up to 40 years in prison. Unlike most co-defendants, he received bond after church members and supporters filled the courtroom on his behalf. He walked out without GPS monitoring. His trial is set for May 2026. The former Survivor contestant who once chased $1 million prize is now fighting to avoid decades in federal prison. And the fire he helped set at County Line Ice House may be what ends his freedom for good. 8 Alfredo Paz Jr. fights inside Lubbock bars were nothing new for the Bandidos and Kinfolk MC. But on November 12, 2020, inside the 50th Street caboose, the tension finally snapped. A Bandido picked up a pool ball from a table claimed by Kinfolk members. One of the Kinfolk members took the move as a direct challenge and pulled a gun, firing the first shot. That's when Alfredo Paz Jr. stepped out from a hallway, drew his own weapon, and fired back. 2 of his rounds hit a Kinfolk member, and the entire bar erupted into panic. People dove for cover as Paz slipped out, jumped on his motorcycle, and disappeared before police arrived. The violence didn't surprise anyone in Lubbock. The Bandidos and Kinfolk had been at war for years. Former Kinfolk president Max Gould later testified that encounters between the two clubs ended in confrontation almost every time. Paz was 40 and served as Sergeant-at-Arms of the Lubbock Bandidos chapter, responsible for discipline, enforcement, and handling violent conflicts. He wore an "Expect No Mercy" patch, a signal inside the club that he had. When the police searched his home, they found a handwritten list of enemies, complete with names and addresses. This was enough proof that the violence was organized, not spontaneous. Paz was arrested and charged with 7 counts of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. But the trial hinged on one question: was he defending himself, or had he gone to the bar expecting trouble? Defense attorneys argued Kinfolk fired first. Surveillance footage confirmed it. Prosecutors argued that Paz knew Kinfolk frequented the caboose and showed up looking for a fight. In October 2023, the jury delivered a mixed verdict: guilty on 2 counts of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, guilty on 2 counts of deadly conduct, and acquitted on 3 counts. On October 27th, he was sentenced to 6 years in prison on the primary charge, 180 days on 2 other charges, and 6 years of probation, all to run concurrently.
Bandidos Motorcycle Gang has been sentenced to 6 years in prison for a 2020 shooting at the 50th Street caboose. The jury also sentenced Alfredo Paz Jr.
In June 2025, the 7th Court of Appeals upheld the conviction. Before his arrest, Paz had been promoted to vice president of the Lubbock chapter. The sergeant-at-arms who carried an expect no mercy patch and kept a list of enemies is now serving a 6-year sentence. A shootout that lasted seconds cost him his position, his freedom, and nearly his future. 9. Justin Cole Forster. Most Bandidos enforcers built their reputations over long careers. Justin Cole Forster did not have that kind of history. He was 28 when federal prosecutors identified him as one of the club's rising enforcers. Young, loyal, and already positioned inside major acts of violence connected to the organization. Forster came up in a very different era of outlaw biking. He was not part of the old Texas biker wars or the early expansion years. His generation grew up in a world shaped by surveillance, federal indictments, and organized retaliation. He adapted to it quickly. By his mid-20s, he had patched into the Welcome to Hell chapter, a Houston-based crew prosecutors later described as a violent enforcement unit, used to pressure or confront anyone who refused Bandido authority. He was not a president or a national officer. What made him valuable was consistency. When leadership called, he showed up. When manpower was needed, his name was on the list. That pattern placed him in multiple confrontations, including the Bimbas Bar assault on February 23, 2023, where around 70 Bandidos surrounded a building and stormed inside to attack former members. Cuts were taken, injuries were severe, and investigators labeled the attack a coordinated enforcement action, not a spontaneous fight. The scrutiny only grew. Federal investigators were already tracking the Bandidos after operations like Operation Texas Rocker, but Forster's involvement gave them new leverage. By 2025, he was named in a sweeping 22-count RICO indictment involving murder, attempted murder, arson, witness tampering, firearms violations, and conspiracy. His primary charges focused on assault causing serious bodily injury and assault with a dangerous weapon. Prosecutors also tied Forster to wider Bandido activity in Texas, including years of violence leading up to the May 2015 Waco shooting, where 9 people were killed during a meeting of biker groups. Forster later pleaded guilty in a separate federal case involving racketeering, drug trafficking, and extortion. According to prosecutors, he now faces a possible life sentence in federal prison. Forster remains in custody, awaiting sentencing. At only 28, he became one of the youngest Bandidos enforcers pulled into a major federal case, earning his place in the indictment not through decades of rank, but through a short and intense period of enforcement work that now leaves him facing decades behind bars. 10. Richard Merla. Every murder has a motive. This one began 3 weeks earlier when a Bandido named Javier Negrete was killed. The club demanded retaliation. They wanted the man responsible, Robert Lara, a 24-year-old San Antonio local with no club ties, known to run in low-level criminal circles and connected to Negrete through mutual acquaintances, and they wanted him dead. Lara wasn't an outlaw biker. He wasn't a rival club member. But investigators later determined he was involved in the confrontation that ended Negrete's life. To the Bandidos, that was enough. No trial, no negotiation. Just an order to kill him. So when Lara pulled into a quiet Interstate 37 rest stop just after 2 a.m. on January 31, 2002, believing he was meeting a woman named Magenta Winans, he had no idea he was walking into a Bandido-ordered execution. Winans had called him earlier, asking him to come alone. She wasn't there to meet him. She was the bait. Waiting in the darkness were Richard Merla and Frederick Cortez, hidden, armed, and under orders to finish the job. As Lara stepped out of his truck, Merla and Cortez stepped from the shadows with pistols raised. 11 rounds hit Lara before he even hit the pavement. He died within seconds. The shooters fled into the night. The operation was planned at the highest level. John Xavier Portillo, president of the Bandidos San Antonio chapter, orchestrated everything. He recruited Winans to lure Lara, supplied the murder weapon, then burned the gun afterward to eliminate evidence. Merla and Cortez were the ones who carried out the execution. Portillo rewarded them immediately with Expect No Mercy patches, the club's highest mark of violent service. Merla wore his proudly. Inside the club, it meant status. Outside the club, it tied him directly to a murder. For 14 years, Merla avoided arrest. The case went cold. The rest stop had no usable footage, no cooperating witnesses, and no weapon. But federal investigators kept digging. RICO cases take time. Former members flipped, old stories resurfaced, and digital records connected the pieces. In March 2017, Merla was finally arrested along with Cortez and others tied to the killing. On May 17, 2018, he stood trial beside National Bandidos leaders Fay Pike and John Portillo. Jurors heard how Portillo had orchestrated the hit, how Merla carried it out, and how the Expect No Mercy patch proved motive and allegiance. Merla was convicted of murder in aid of racketeering and conspiracy to commit murder. In September 2018, he was sentenced to life in federal prison with no possibility of parole. The man who executed Robert Lara at a rest stop now spends every day in a federal cell. The patch that once earned him respect inside the Bandidos could not save him from the consequences outside it. 11 bullets ended one man's life that night. The sentence that followed ended Merla's. 11 Howard Wayne Baker. Jeffrey Brady was a 41-year-old member of the Ghost Riders Motorcycle Club, a small Fort Worth crew that operated independently and refused to bow to the Bandidos. He wasn't a national figure or a major criminal, just a loyal local rider spending a Friday night with his club. Gators Jam Inn was a small neighborhood bar on Race Street in Fort Worth, the kind of place where bikers and locals mixed over beer, darts, and live music. Nothing about it suggested the scene of an execution, but Howard Wayne Baker, president of the Fort Worth Bandidos, had already made up his mind. The Ghost Riders weren't showing proper respect. They weren't recognizing Bandido authority in Fort Worth. In Baker's world, that was an offense that required punishment. Before Brady or anyone else realized what was happening, as many as 30 Bandidos pushed through the front and back doors at the same time. Around 15 shots echoed through the bar. As people scrambled for cover, Brady was dragged outside, beaten, and surrounded on the pavement. Baker stood in that circle. Brady's wife watched helplessly as he was executed with a single shot to the head. Besides these two, other men were wounded, but survived. The message wasn't just for the Ghost Riders. The Cossacks and the Winos crew had also been operating in Fort Worth without Bandido permission. All three clubs were meant to understand exactly who controlled the territory. Police arrested Baker 2 days later. He posted bond and waited for trial. When the case began in 2017, security was so tight that state troopers lined the courthouse, and every person entering the courtroom was searched. Witness after witness placed Baker at the scene. One testified he saw Baker holding a gun. After nearly a full day of deliberation, the jury returned guilty verdicts on murder, aggravated assault, organized crime, and directing a criminal street gang. Baker received a 45-year sentence and was taken into state custody. Under the Texas law of parties, he was responsible for every shot fired. That night because he ordered the attack. The Brady murder later appeared in the federal RICO case against National Bandidos leadership, used as evidence that violence inside the club wasn't rogue, but it was sanctioned. Now Baker sits in a Texas prison, serving decades for a message he insisted on delivering in blood. 12. Andrew Berdett Moore, February 20th, 2025. A cyber tip landed at the Lynn County Sheriff's Office. Someone was using a messaging app to receive and send. The next day, investigators connected the account to a name, Andrew Berdett Moore, 37 years old. La Mesa, Texas, Bandidos member, February 24th, 2025. The La Mesa Police Department SWAT team rolled up to Moore's home. They executed the arrest warrant. Moore was taken into custody without incident. Detectives swept through the residence with a search warrant. Multiple weapons, gang memorabilia, electronics. The Texas Anti-Gang Unit assisted specifically because of Moore's Bandidos affiliation. La Mesa Police Chief Joshua Peterson made it clear this wasn't just The gang connection elevated everything. Investigators seized Moore's phone. What they found inside destroyed any chance of a defense. A group chat where Moore was asking others if they wanted to trade content. 40 videos of 2 images. Messages where Moore admitted. The federal system took over. In July 2025, Moore was indicted on federal charges of receipt and distribution of. If convicted, he faced up to 20 years in federal prison. But Moore had other plans. Sometime between his February arrest and June, he ran, fled the country, made it all the way to Bogota, Colombia. The 106th Judicial District wasn't having it. They coordinated with the U.S. Marshals Service and the Lubbock, Texas as anti-gang unit. Secured an arrest warrant, tracked Moore to South America. June 4, 2025, Colombian authorities arrested Moore in Bogota. The extradition process began. The fugitive Bandido was brought back to the United States into federal custody. September 16, 2025, Moore appeared in federal court. He agreed to plead guilty to receipt and distribution of. The plea deal acknowledged the severity of the evidence against him. His flight to Colombia demonstrated exactly what investigators already knew. The Bandidos network wasn't just about motorcycles and brotherhood. Members had connections, resources, the ability to flee across international borders when consequences arrived. Moore remained in federal custody awaiting sentencing. The judge would determine his fate at a later date. Maximum sentence: 20 years in federal prison. 13. Guillermo Reyes and Jose Herrada. The gunfire started without warning. A 45-year-old man dropped to the pavement on San Antonio's west side as multiple rounds tore through the air. Witnesses scrambled, calling 911, and when officers arrived, they immediately recognized the pattern. This wasn't a robbery. It wasn't random. It had the signature of a Bandido hit. Police quickly identified the suspected shooters: Guillermo Reyes and Jose Herrada, 2 documented Bandido associates who operated as street-level enforcers. They weren't leaders or high-ranking officers. They were the men who handled retaliation, intimidation, and territorial control. Ground soldiers in the club's ongoing war across Texas. The victim survived the attack. His name was never released publicly, and investigators withheld medical details while building the case. But authorities made one thing clear: the shooting was gang-related and tied to the Bandidos' presence on the west side. For years, Texas cities had been caught in a series of biker conflicts: Houston, Fort Worth, Lubbock, and now San Antonio. The January shooting fit the pattern: broad daylight, a public street, and a target chosen for reasons known only within club circles. Reyes and Herrada were quickly arrested and charged. Attempted murder carried less weight than a homicide, but the message behind the bullets was the same. The west side belonged to the Bandidos, and anyone who forgot that paid the price. 14. Anselmo Barrera. Bexar County SWAT did not show up at 1200 Cantrell Drive by accident. They arrived with a narcotics warrant and a clear understanding of the man inside. Anselmo Barrera, 60 years old, a longtime national-level figure within the Bandidos outlaw motorcycle gang. Deputies moved through the main house and a detached clubhouse on the property. What they found showed just how deeply Barrera was tied to the organization. 33 firearms were spread across multiple rooms, 2 body armor vests, a stolen Harley-Davidson motorcycle, a stolen pistol, walls covered in decades of Bandidos patches, photos, and memorabilia. Then came the cash. More than $266,000 was hidden around the home. K-9 units alerted repeatedly, and investigators suspected the money came from narcotics, not any legitimate income. Barrera was arrested on a single charge: possession of body armor by a convicted felon, a third-degree felony. Investigators made it clear that more charges were likely. His criminal record stretched back more than 30 years, including felony drug cases from the 1990s, a hindering charge in 2008, and smaller offenses after that. None of them had ever resulted in long-term prison time.
Deputies say 60-year-old Anselmo Barrera, a documented member of the Bandidos outlaw motorcycle gang, was taken to the Bexar County Jail.
On November 3, 2025, Barrera posted a $65,000 bond and walked out of jail onto strict house arrest. No guns, no travel. Random drug and alcohol testing. Full electronic monitoring. To the sheriff's office, Barrera was not just another bandido. He had held rank for years and operated from San Antonio, a city the club has dominated since the 1960s. The weapons, the body armor, the cash, the clubhouse setup, all of it reflected a man who had spent decades building influence and income through the drug trade. More charges were expected, but Barrera had survived the system before. House arrest was a victory compared to a long federal sentence. For a man who avoided serious prison time for decades, he remained what many inside the club already called him: untouchable, at least for now. 15. Michael Sandom. Michael Sandom's outlaw ambitions began long before the violence. On October 15, 2002, he resigned from the East St. Paul Police Service before he could be fired. Winnipeg police had photographed him attending an outlaw biker gathering while on leave. For most officers, that would have been a humiliating end. For Sandom, it was the first step toward the world he truly wanted. He believed he was destined to run the outlaw biker scene in Canada. His background looked impressive on paper. He had served in the Canadian Armed Forces from 1990 to 1994, then worked in bylaw enforcement and private security. But nothing gave him real power or status. The Bandidos did. Or at least he thought they would. In 2004, Sandom created the Winnipeg Bandidos chapter and appointed himself president. He recruited members and built a probationary crew, hoping Houston would recognize them as an official chapter. But Houston leadership never approved the group. The Toronto Bandidos, led by Canadian President Giovanni Muscedere, controlled all operations in the country. They dismissed Sandom's Winnipeg crew as unofficial and unrecognized. Sandom resented it. He started emailing Houston, criticizing Toronto leadership and presenting himself as the man who should lead Canada. He sent flattering messages about loyalty and brotherhood. On April 7, 2006, Sandom and his Winnipeg members traveled to Wayne Kelestein's farm in Ontario. According to Sandom's later claims, the plan was to strip the Toronto Bandidos of their patches and remove them from power. 8 Toronto members arrived that night, unaware they were walking into an ambush. Giovanni Muscedere, George Jessamy, George Kriarakis, Luis Raposo, Frank Salerno, Paul Sinopoli, Jamie Flantz, and Michael Trotta were executed one at a time in what became known as the Shedden Massacre. Sandom insisted he was shocked and tried to intervene. Witness testimony said otherwise. A police informant identified only as MH testified he saw Sandom shoot Jamie Flantz. At dawn, the bodies were loaded into abandoned vehicles and dumped in a field for a farmer to find. On June 16, 2006, police raided Sandom's home. He ran outside yelling that he was never a real member. During questioning, he denied involvement more than 200 times. He claimed he was raking leaves the weekend of the murders. Investigators pointed out there were no trees on his street. When confronted with the evidence, he changed his story again, saying he was actually an undercover informant for police. Prosecutors highlighted that he never contacted law enforcement, lied repeatedly, and had his vehicle professionally cleaned days after the killings. None of his stories matched reality. At trial in 2009, Sandom cried on the stand and insisted he was a victim. The jury did not believe him. On October 29, 2009, he was convicted of 8 counts of first-degree murder. He, Kelestein, and Dwight Mushy all received life sentences with no chance of parole for 25 years. The Shedden Massacre destroyed the Bandidos in Canada. The Toronto chapter was wiped out. The Winnipeg chapter was arrested. Fay Pike revoked all Canadian charters. Sandom's attempt to seize power ended the entire Canadian operation. The former police officer who thought he could outsmart the outlaw world now sits in a Canadian prison. The man who once dreamed of wearing the world's best colors wears a prison uniform instead. He becomes eligible for parole in 2034 when he will be 64 years old. 15. John Fehee. John Fehee grew up in public housing in Telapea, a suburb in Sydney's northwest. At Cumberland High School, he excelled in rugby and basketball, good enough that the Parramatta Eels offered him a chance to play professionally. Instead of taking the contract, he chose the outlaw world. Fehee rose to become National Sergeant at Arms of the Bandidos in Australia. It was the enforcer position, the role responsible for discipline, retaliation, and enforcing the club's rules through force when necessary. His tattoos told the story. BFFB across his chest, Bandidos forever, forever Bandidos. The gang's name was inked across his arm and stomach. His social media handle was Menace to Society, a warning wrapped in a persona. By 2013, Fehee was living on the Gold Coast. His brother Jason had taken the top seat as national president. Together, the Fehee brothers sat at the peak of the Australian Bandidos hierarchy. Two men who had climbed from Telapea housing blocks to the highest ranks of the outlaw scene. Everything changed in mid-2013 when Fehee resigned from the Bandidos. Court evidence later suggested he moved to the Hells Angels, one of the most shocking defections in Australian biker history. The shift happened at the same time Queensland introduced some of the toughest anti-gang laws in the country, legislation that crippled club operations and prevented the Hells Angels from securing territory in Burleigh Heads. Fehee left the Gold Coast as the crackdown intensified. By 2014, he tried to reinvent himself, told people he had walked away from the bikie world, spoke about wanting to coach rugby league, even wrote to coaching legend Wayne Bennett asking for guidance on mentoring young players. But the transformation never took hold. The rugby league future he described was just a story, a temporary mask over a life built inside one of Australia's deadliest outlaw clubs. These men once ruled streets, cities, and entire chapters, but even the most feared bandito eventually meets a cell stronger than any patch. Some bragged about violence, some lived for it. Now they wake up every day behind steel doors. Every outlaw motorcycle gang has members who took things too far. The next video breaks down those legends, the shot callers. Click on the next video to watch the enforcers other bikers still talk about in whispers.